You're with Julian on the Brown Notes and a review of the unexpected surprise release from Radiohead, How to the Thief live recordings 2003 to 2009. These are very interesting times for Radiohead. They had been a right-on, bulletproof band for many years at the very forefront of progressive politics and artistic integrity, and achievements artistically as well. The last few years have seen a lot of that shine rub off, and it's to do with Israel. So they played Tel Aviv before this wave of current fast motion genocide in the Gaza Strip, which drew a lot of condemnation from me. I actually didn't play them on my radio show for a couple of years, which is performative, I guess. It doesn't really achieve much. I love Radiohead. And I also have, a lot of music and art that I like has been made by really, really bad people. So it's, I think, up to you whether you want to participate in that. It wasn't that they played Tel Aviv as much as the response. Both them and Nick Cave played Tel Aviv around the same time and tried to justify it with the most mealy-mouthed, lack of understanding way that they could about how, that artists shouldn't be punished. They opposed Netanyahu, but not realizing how much of a politicized act in normalizing what Israel is doing in Gaza and the West Bank is to just even play there. It's not the same as other things. People kept saying, what if they play America? Does that mean they support the war in Iraq and Afghanistan? No one believes that they're supporting the Bush administration by playing in America. They do, however, believe that there is a part of them that is supporting the state of Israel by the virtue of so few major acts playing there and how politicized it is used by the regime as a determiner of the normalization of Israel, and by extension what they're doing. So I was really against all of that. But now, since the that spectre has stayed with them, Tom York played in Sydney this year, and it went global when a member of the audience shouted out something pro-Gaza at him in the crowd in his acoustic tour, and he left the stage. And then I think he came back. But he's released a longer thing about how he feels about the whole situation, as has the elephant in the room being Johnny Greenwood, their guitarist and musical genius, no doubt, who is married to an Israeli woman, but has also been making music with an Israeli artist who I believe had previously made either statements or music celebrating the IDF. So they came out, and I think he said this long-winded thing about how, how can anyone, playing the victim, which wasn't a good look, how can anyone feel like we support Netanyahu? Obviously we don't. But then he went into equivocation about both sides, which wasn't a good look, and they haven't improved their standing. So it was kind of weird. But I mentioned all of that long preamble because they've now released How to the Thief live. Now, How to the Thief, which came out in 2003, is their most political work. Even though they have been abstract politically lots of times in their music, they've never been quite so overtly political as at that moment in 2003, where they were on a run that has not been achieved by a rock act, I don't believe, since, which was the Bends, OK Computer, Kid A. Amnesiac is my favourite Radiohead album. Should do a review of that, shouldn't I, online, as to why. When How to the Thief came out, How to the Thief was a slogan aimed at George W. Bush for stealing the second election. From, which way around was it? Which was the Al Gore one? I'll say Al Gore anyway. You're not going to check, are you? But the notion was that this was a snapshot of the world at the time. It was also regarded as their weakest album since Pablo Honey. Now, I saw them at Glastonbury in 2003 as part of this very tour that is part of this album release, which does stretch up to 2009. I'm not sure the date of every individual track here. And it was the best, probably the best night of my life. I saw Arthur Lee of Love with the touring band Love from the 1960s, but mainly made up of newer musicians, but him play the entirety of Forever Changes, went to the main stage and saw the Flaming Lips on the back of Yoshimi and the Soft Bulletin and then Radiohead, and it was just a magnificent night. And I do recognise the vibe from this album, so it's a nostalgia trip for me. Another element to it is the fact that the album itself was not cold enough. It was deemed to be bloated. There were a few too many drifty ballads on the album. And Tom York is currently adapting the Hail to the Thief era recordings for, I think, a production of Shakespeare, maybe even Hamlet, in a musical vein, something like that, and came across these live recordings and was blown away by the amount of energy in the live performances. I genuinely believe that this period is the best live period of Radiohead's career, and you can definitely hear that. So does it answer all of the questions that were the problems with Hail to the Thief? I always thought Hail to the Thief would have been served better as a series of EPs, with the songs that were relatable to each other put on those various EPs, because there were some quite drifty moments on that album, and this culls some of those tracks, though ironically not probably enough, but it leaves out some of the tracks so that it's not as bloated. The other thing is it's more energetic and it's more direct. So it kicks off with one of the two major explosions on the album. 2 + 2 = 5. The eruption at the halfway stage is arguably the greatest Radiohead moment of all time. It is absolutely magnificent and one of two major eruptions on the two best tracks on this album. Sit Down, Stand Up is absolutely great too. Sail to the Moon is another drifty ballad, but probably up at the higher end of the drifty ballads from the Hail to the Thief studio album. I just don't know that they're also run Radiohead songs. I don't think anyone's sitting there thinking Sail to the Moon's my favourite, yet that's probably better than the other couple of ballads that are on here. Go to Sleep is excellent, but Where I End and You Begin is another standout, really driving. It was a standout on the album as well. It was one of those albums where you'd go like two tracks of middling music and then be hit by something like Where I End and You Begin. The other standout on this album is the crowd. The crowd are amazing. Like, they do the claps on, I think it's We Suck Young Blood, which is a very morbid, vampiric song, a very slow death march pace, and the crowd are clapping along and they sing along to songs. It's a very ebullient crowd, and they're a standout element of this album. The gloaming is also good. The other absolute major standout is the best song from the album, There, which had a beautiful melody. I think it's what they came on to at Glastonbury in 2003, and you can just audibly hear the crowd just singing along. And the beautiful verses on it and the beautiful guitar motif is a unique song in their catalogue. But again, like 2 + 2, it absolutely explodes in its second half. And those explosions are so much more in this live version of the document than the studio versions. I Will, a very nondescript ballad, but it's 2 minutes, and it's between the eruptions of There and Myxomatosis, one of the loudest tracks on the album. These are the only problems I have. Probably, like, I can put up with I Will, and I didn't really have a problem with Sail to the Moon either, even though I would probably put them down at the bottom of the best tracks on the album. Scatterbrain I would have left off. I don't think anyone's ever said I really want to hear Scatterbrain. Again, it's probably because the Myxomatosis is very loud, and A Wolf at the Door is a bit more loud. That's the last track on the album, which is pretty decent. I wouldn't say it was one of the best, but overall, I think I don't like modern live albums. I think if you go back to the 1970s, There are bands like the Allman Brothers or Cheap Trick, or no, there was lots of bands that made live albums in the 70s that were bigger than their studio discographies. But I don't really see that in the modern era. The War on Drugs are one of the only bands that seem to have released a few live albums. And I've had problems with both of them, purely on a material choice basis. Same last year I reviewed it and didn't give it a good review because half of it was absolutely out of the park and half of it was dreary tracks that I just don't know why they put on there. Not many bands are doing good live albums this century, I don't think, which is odd because the recording of and the ability to recreate studio sounds on the stage is so much better now, and the recording qualities are so much better. And Radiohead themselves, who did have a very strong reputation as a live band, it is weird that they've never done a live album that's a collection. They did the excellent live album from the early, I Might Be Wrong live, which came off the back of ironically, a lackluster reception to another album, Amnesiac. So they have actually had lackluster receptions to Amnesiac, followed by a live album recontextualizing it, and then the following album, How to the Thief, also now 20 years later gets a live album. I Might Be Wrong was very, very good as well. This one is hews more closely to the studio versions, but just with a lot more energy. So I thought this was a really good listen. I think I'd probably lean towards listening to it over listening to the studio version. So I'm going to give How to the Thief live a 8.5 out of 10.